to Protect America's press conference on electric vehicles, particularly with school buses. My name is Alex Cornell-DeHue, and I am the president and co-founder of Elected Officials to Protect America. EOPA is a coalition and network of lawmakers who care deeply about protecting our planet and people. We run a number of programs across the US that work with lawmakers at the local and state and federal level to protect our environment, protect our land and waters, and fight the climate crisis, as well as protect environmental justice. Today, we have a number of wonderful speakers from across the US that are focusing on going to let us know what's happening in their communities, particularly when it comes to electrification and protecting our children with electric school buses. This is an issue that I got to know firsthand in many ways when we and our dependence on a single source of energy when I was deployed out in Iraq with the Marine Corps. We came across a line of cars, trucks, and tractors really as far as the eye could see, and it was dusk. And so as we got closer, we began to realize that they were waiting for gasoline to fuel their tanks. And because of the curfew, they were willing to put their life on the line to wait there and get the single source of energy. In a pretty horribly ironic way, the democratic nations of the world are lined up to the autocratic nations who control OPEC for this single source of energy, particularly Putin's using that single source of energy as a stranglehold in Ukraine. Now, the great thing is we have an amazing opportunity to change that, right? When we get off having to be reliant on fossil fuels, all the autocratic nations are now have much more reduced influence. And the additional thing that's even better, it protects our economy and improves our health. And one of the most important things we can do for our communities is improve the health of our children. And that's where electric school buses come as the largest fleet in America, really, which is, it's iconic, right? Our buses are enviable from around the world. But unfortunately, very, very few of them so far have been transferred to being electric, and the infrastructure bill and the IRA has funding in it to make that happen. So we're going to talk with a number of local elected officials who are championing this across the US, starting with Senator Will Haskell from Connecticut. Senator?
Thank you so much, Alex. It's always a pleasure to be with you and this esteemed group of local and state and county elected officials who care so deeply about the crisis of climate change. Perhaps like many of you, the first article I read this morning had a pretty gloomy headline. Front page of the New York Times said, "Climate pledges are falling short and a chaotic future looks more like reality." More specifically, the article said the countries around the world are failing to live up to their commitment to fight climate change, pointing Earth toward a future marked by more intense flooding, wildfires, drought, heat waves, and species extinction. So it goes without saying that the problems we're facing can feel huge, and our global governing structures, even our national governing structures, they can feel insufficient. And conversely, sometimes the power of our offices, it can feel quite small, but I think it would be a mistake, in fact, a catastrophic mistake, to throw up our hands and assume that there's nothing that we can do. Let's start with the stuff that we all know and remember. Do you remember the smell that filled your nostrils when you got onto the school bus as a kid? That dangerous diesel exhaust, it actually has a very real negative impact on the health of young people. In fact, kids spend on average more than 20 minutes a day inside a school bus, and the pollution inside that school bus exceeds the pollution outside of it by about 5 to 10 times. That exhaust worsens cognitive and respiratory health, and diesel exhaust is actually a known carcinogen. It's bad for everyone, but it is especially harmful to children. Thankfully, school districts now have another choice. They can use zero-emission school buses instead. But their deployment has been too slow. And frankly, local and state governments they have been distracted, as though there's anything more important than protecting the lungs of the next generation. So it's time to make electric school buses the rule and not the exception. I'm excited to hear from my fellow speakers today, but I want to tell you very briefly about what we're up to here in Connecticut. We applauded President Biden's inclusion of $5 billion in the bipartisan infrastructure package to help school districts electrify their bus fleet. This money is available through the EPA's Clean School Bus Program, and it is historic and game-changing. But we also know that it's not going to be enough alone to get the job done. State and local governments have to be partners in this historic undertaking. So this past year, we passed Senate Bill 4, or the Connecticut Clean Air Act. Specifically, sections 12 and 13 of that bill provide a matching grant program, because we know that the $5 billion in competitive grants require state investment too. So we're putting our money where our mouth is when we're setting up a $20 million matching fund in our most recent budget for the purposes of electrifying school buses. We also know that electric school buses save money and reduce emissions in the long term, because charging costs compared to fueling costs are usually about 40 to 75% lower. And even just one bus can save a district about $6,000 annually in fuel and maintenance. But the upfront cost of this technology can be daunting. So we're giving school districts a little bit more flexibility in their contracting, allowing the cost to amortize over a 10-year period, so long as the schools are contracting with at least one zero-emission bus. And we're rolling these buses out in a way that makes sure no community is left behind. We're requiring all school buses in Connecticut to be zero emission by 2040, but the deadline for environmental justice communities is actually a decade earlier, in 2030. Finally, applying for federal grants, installing chargers, training school bus operators, all of that can carry costs and requires expertise. And the federal and state government can't just wipe its hands of those really complicated details. So instead, we've tasked a team within our Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, a team of experts within the state government, to provide technical assistance to school districts every step of the way. As the youngest member of the Connecticut State Legislature, I am really excited about the Connecticut Clean Air Act and the bipartisan infrastructure package, because I know that both will have a meaningful, positive impact on the health of young people. Climate change can feel like a huge problem, but this problem feels quite close to home. And I know that together we're going to be able to get something done. Thanks, Alex.
Cool. Thank you, Will. It was a wonderful study and summary of what you mentioned, and your leadership in Connecticut can be an example to other states and the federal government to urgently accelerate this. So next, we're going to go to Tyron Harris, Board of Education Chairman in East Hartford Public Schools.
Thank you, Alex, and Will, great job kicking us off. So my name is Tyron Harris. I'm the chairman of the East Hartford School Board here in Connecticut. The East Hartford School Board is in East Hartford, we have 12 schools with over 65,000 students, for whom 90% identify as minorities. Our community shoulders this disappointing burden of exhaust fumes, which are major health hazards and can hamper lung development and growing in our children. So we know, even worse, that diesel population and diesel pollution that leaks inside of the buses are five times higher than those outside of the buses. And particularly, in addition to the short-term problems like coughing, headaches, nasal breathing, diesel fumes damage to both the lungs and the heart. And students in every community deserves a healthy benefits of breathing clear air instead of diesel fumes from other school buses. So we know that electric school buses run on battery power, with the tailpipe emission protecting our children and the planet. So we must do everything within our power to power the planet with clean electric energy. Our children need us to act today. So when you think about the electric school buses, we think about clean energy, we think about clean air, we think about lowering the use of diesel fumes, lowering the cost of gas, and actually taking that burden off of our school board budgets. So I guess, as Will mentioned, I'm so proud that in Connecticut in May of 22, our governor passed Senate Bill 4, which set an early fleet electrification by 2030, and as Alex said, by 2040, have our school buses in Connecticut be fully electrified. And so our key point at this point is really just focusing on funding. So funding could also be used to purchase, install, operate, and maintain the infrastructure needed to charge, fuel, and maintain a zero-emission vehicle. So, and one of the districts that in our district, we contract with DACO school services, and they actually have already started building and have currently 12 electric school buses on their fleet. So this Senate bill that's going to assist us in getting this done for our, particularly in East Hartford, hopefully by 2030, to make sure that we start getting our buses electrified and starting putting them on the roads in the town of East Hartford.
Well, that's exciting to hear for your member in East Hartford. And the other thing about it is they have some interesting side benefits, right? Where there was a power outage, the school bus could power buildings, for instance. And where do people go in times of disasters? Actually, a lot of our schools. So there's an added level of benefit to a lot of the school buses being electrifying, where we have the ability to respond to other disasters and help others out. In addition to saving our children's health. All right, next we're going to go to William Reinhardt, our Albany County Legislator in New York and EOPA's New York Leadership Council co-chair.
Hi, thanks for inviting me for this event, and I'm going to talk about state and local as it applies to electric school buses, because I can happily say that both New York State and the community I live in, Bethlehem, are on the forefront of efforts in this regard. One point I want to make sort of as background is New York State, because of largely because of New York City, but also because of its upstate metropolitan communities, has many transit vehicles. And when electric buses first came into something that was real and becoming economical, the decision was made, I would say, pretty much across the state, that the first step is to deal with the transit buses, because they drive more miles, so the savings you get is greater, because the operating cost is a function of mileage and the duty cycle and all that. So a lot of the initial efforts in New York were to start experimenting with hybrid electric buses and then battery electric buses for transit systems. But now the effort is focused more on the school buses, and I would say it's for the reasons that have already been mentioned: the health of the kids and the realization about the medical issues around it. And I think probably everyone here can, as one of the earlier speakers said, remember their own experience with a diesel bus. And how it can be very unpleasant. And I have those, and I'm not going to bore you with it, but it's like people don't like to stand behind buses when they accelerate from a bus stop. And there are reasons for that. So the electric bus, really, its time has come. In New York State, we have recently passed legislation which says all new school bus purchases will have to be electric by 2027. And then all vehicles in operation will have to be electric by 2035. In a similar way, and I had some level of activity in it, although I'd have to say most of my work is more on the renewable energy development side of this climate and energy challenge, is the town of Bethlehem, where I live, has committed to start buying electric buses. And they're utilizing some state incentives to help with that. But we were all very happy here in town here in Bethlehem. We worked on this issue for several years, and we finally got the school board to make a strong move in this direction. One of the points I want to add to this discussion, which was just mentioned a little bit, was how the school bus batteries, actually, you can think of them as having multiple benefits for us, not just the cleaner transportation. But if you think about one of the things that the organization I used to work for, NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, they've been doing research on vehicle-to-grid systems for quite some time. And the idea here is that you can look at the batteries in all these buses as part of our utility grid system. And we all know, if you delve into it very much at all, that our renewable energy future for our utility system and frankly, everything else, is reliant on having robust battery and other forms of energy storage to take advantage of the renewable energy when it's available, when the wind blows, when the sun shines, et cetera. So we really have to ramp up our battery storage as part of this whole solution. So the school bus batteries can actually be a part of that. And as was already mentioned, they can serve as emergency sources of power. They can also serve as kind of grid leveling opportunities. So the utility can store the power in the batteries when we get great sunshine or when the wind is blowing well. You never have to worry about renewable energy, which, and by the way, this does happen right now in upstate New York. There are times where the utility grid system doesn't need all the renewable energy power that's being generated. And so basically it's vented, it's wasted, it's, the blades, the wind blades are turned sideways so they don't generate power. It's not optimal. So the batteries will help us reach this optimal harvesting of all the available renewable energy. So I'm actually quite excited about this. This is part of, when people talk about the smart grid of the future, this is part of that. This is what that means, is we're really using technology to maximize our use of the available incoming renewable energy sources and get off the fossil fuel, which is, people like to say it's killing the planet. I like to say it's really killing us. The planet will figure out a way to survive. It's we that are at risk. So this is not just an issue about, we're not just saving the planet as if that's something outside of our economic system. It's us that's at risk, and we have to deal with this climate emergency. The last thing I want to say is one of the great resources that the EOPA folks just made me aware of is, for anyone listening, is the World Resources Institute Electric School Bus Initiative website. Great information there. So if you are with a school district and you want to learn more, it's really some good stuff. I looked through it over the last day or so. It really gives you a lot of options to understand what the issues are, who the stakeholders need to be. And it doesn't say that this is a blueprint that everyone has to follow, but depending on who you are, what school district you're in, what the local circumstances are, it gives you kind of a roadmap to help you figure out how to proceed. So it's really great information. And so we have the technology, we have the interest, we have the need. So we all need to just keep talking about this and get it moving as quickly as we can. Thank you.
That is very true. I mean, the transportation sector is 40% of our greenhouse gas emissions in the US. And with over 480,000 electric school bus, eventually electric, 480,000 school buses out there, this can make a real difference to our local communities and globally. Unfortunately, about only 1% of the school buses right now are electrified. So we're on our way, but thanks to everyone's efforts here, we'll have this accelerated. And particularly when we look at Florida, Cindy Lerner, former mayor of Pinecrest, Florida, and former state representative, we'd love to hear what's happening in your districts.
Thank you, Alex. I'm really excited to hear about what is happening in Connecticut and New York, because we aren't there yet as a state in Florida. And what we know is that we are ground zero for the adverse impacts of climate change, with sea level rise, more intensified hurricanes, and the extreme weather events that we're seeing. So it is incumbent on us to take a leadership role and advance initiatives at the local and state level to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. Toward that end, back in 2009, Southeast Florida counties and cities came together and created a regional climate compact and a plan that initially had about 100 steps that cities and counties committed to take. They shared methodologies, they shared the projections for sea level rise, and they started planning for how to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So knowing that the transportation sector, as you said, Alex, is the single largest source of regional emissions, it's incumbent on the state to take the kind of action that I just heard from Senator Will Haskell they are doing in Connecticut with the Clean Air Act, not only setting standards and goals, but funding. And that's going to be really critical for Florida. Miami-Dade County has actually taken the lead and created a climate action strategy, which they launched in October 2021. And it describes all of the multiple fronts for Miami-Dade to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions 50% by 2030. They've got partnerships within the county. We've got 34 cities and are beginning a partnership with Miami-Dade Public School District. The county itself has actually already purchased and has seen delivery on 33 new electric buses for our transit system. They committed to fund 75 by next year and have placed those orders. They received some funding, I believe it was about 19 million from the Volkswagen settlement to assist them, and they have a transit surtax to assist them. Their climate action strategy for the county refers to Miami-Dade County Public School District in its introductory comments by saying a prime example of the collaborative strength of the climate action strategy is what the Dade County Public Schools has done with their Clean Energy Task Force. And the report outlines how public schools will seek to achieve 100% net zero clean energy by 2030. They had several recommendations. They pledged to move forward with the order of school buses, and with the funding from initial funding from the Volkswagen settlement, which came into Florida through the Department of Environmental Protection, grants allocations were made to, I believe it was 7 counties throughout Florida, Miami-Dade being one of them. And Miami-Dade Public Schools made a commitment and has just ordered the first 10 electric school buses, which I believe will be the first electric school buses in the state of Florida. We're going to hear from our school board member and our sustainability director in a few minutes with more detail about that. But it is taking a leadership role that we are really very excited about, not only because of the reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, but as we've heard, the significant health hazards to lung development and even to brain development in children by sitting on a school bus twice a day, 5 days a week. It is critical that Miami-Dade County Public Schools make the full transition to an all-electric fleet to eliminate these hazards. And we look forward to the opportunity to seek funding additionally through the Inflation Reduction Act, which is the largest climate investment ever. That funding is coming through the EPA, the Clean School Bus Program. We will be applying for funding over the next several years through that program. And hopefully the state will step up to the plate, just like Connecticut and New York are doing, that'll be our project over the next couple years, is to take a lead and go forward to the state and ask them to take that kind of action to set standards and to invest in clean transportation for school children throughout the state of Florida. We are happy to have the assistance of the World Resource Institute, as well as the Southern Alliance for Clean Energy and Clean Cities Coalition and the Alliance for Electric School Buses. There are lots of wonderful collaborative efforts that can be put together to put us on a trajectory in South Florida, and especially in Miami-Dade County, where we take a lead in enhancing and eventually having a full fleet of clean transportation.
Wonderful. Well, we were looking forward to that when that happens. And the other interesting thing about the school buses, I think we were, as a theme here, the added benefits. It's only 20 moving parts versus 2,000 in the engine. So a lot more reliable and easy to maintain, right? I think it's about 60% less expensive to maintain the school buses. So long-term, a good investment in many ways for our school boards. So speaking of school boards, Luisa Santos is the Miami-Dade school board member, and we'd love to hear your thoughts.
Thank you so much, Alex. It's a pleasure to be here and an honor to be with people from all over the country who are, taking action and not just talking about this. It's really inspiring. I proudly serve on the Miami-Dade County Public Schools Board. It is the third largest school district in the nation. We have over 487 schools, 330,000 students, and 73% of our students qualify for free and reduced lunch. And this community that I just gave you numbers for is a community that, like many communities around the nation, has been advocating for clean transportation options for a long time. For years before I even joined this board, we had students, families, and community educating us on the need for this transition. And I'd really like to highlight the work of one student named Holly. She conducted science experiments. She told us, she came to the board even before I was on the board, and she told us about the correlation between clean air and student academic outcomes, of course, and health outcomes. As we heard from Senator Will, she came to us and she told us about that pollution inside the bus exceeding pollution outside the bus. She told us about the known carcinogens that our students are breathing in. And while she did talk to us about student health and academic outcomes, she also told us to remember those bus drivers and bus aides. And I thought that was really important that she highlighted this is a student and staff issue. And so she always closed by telling us we all have our role to play. We all, at every level, city, county, state, federal, we must act now. And so when I came on this board, I was happy to meet with students like Holly, parents like Michelle Drucker, advocates like Cindy Lerner. And there were many, many of them who worked with me to introduce a resolution in April of 2021 to acknowledge the urgency of achieving 100% clean energy use by 2030. And this is important. In the resolution, my colleagues helped to make it better, and they added for better student health and financially responsible stewardship. And I think my colleagues have done a really great job of understanding that there is also a financial case to be made here. But of course, the moral imperative is for student health and for all of our health and our ability to live on this planet. And so that resolution, I'm so proud to say, was unanimously passed with the support of every single one of my colleagues. And that resolution created the Clean Energy Task Force, which you just heard a little bit about. That task force included industry experts, staff from every department that might be affected, from budget to transportation to academics. We had partners like the Miami-Dade County Chief Resiliency Officer. We had the Miami-Dade County Chief Heat Officer, all of these people came together, and it was important that they were all at the table from the beginning so that we could find all the ways we could work together, and so that staff members, for example, could explain the challenges they would face as they transition from the beginning, as they had the industry experts to talk with them and figure out the challenges. So the most important recommendation that came out of that report that this task force put together was that we needed a chief sustainability officer. And I'm proud to say that my colleagues supported those efforts, and that led to the creation of the position which Carly Pulido is in now, which you'll hear from in a second. And so, I've been on this board 2 years now, and it's taken 2 years to set the infrastructure up for us to be able to take that action in a way that will lead to outcomes. And so we've come a really long way, and we have a really long way to go. We, at Miami-Dade County Public Schools, we received $11.6 million through the Volkswagen Settlement Fund. And our goal really is that, we are working to electrify all 999 buses in our fleet. That is a huge number. And so if we can get it right, our impact will be tremendous. We've applied to the historic funding available from the EPA. We have the Volkswagen Settlement Fund money, but we are not being funded at the rate that it will take to invest in this long-term financially sound investment. And so my big ask here is that we continue to think about the additional ways, as we've heard some creative in other ways, that we can support in the form of matching funds, grants, et cetera, to make this reality possible for our school districts. It makes sense financially in the long term, but that initial investment is where we need the help. And so I'm happy that you'll hear from Carly next, because I'm sure she'll share more details about the way she's hit the ground running at Miami-Dade County Public Schools, and all that we can all be excited to see in the upcoming months.
Great. Thank you. That it is very true. The $5 billion is not going to electrify all 480,000 across the US. So we need to be creative and work within the states and local, but also get more federal funding. And see what Carly, who's the sustainability officer at Miami-Dade County Public Schools, and your innovative solutions and hard work.
Yeah, thank you so much, Alex. And Luis, I think you did an awesome job explaining about all the amazing initiatives we've been taking part of over here at Dade County Public Schools. And just to echo back what Luisa was saying when she mentioned the Clean Energy Task Force, which was essential in moving our sustainability goals forward, but also creating this position. So I want to emphasize the power that we have as a community, whether that is an elected official, whether that is a student, whether that is administrative staff, and really pushing this electrification forward. As a school district, I think our number one goal is to ensure our students are receiving the education that they need to support them for a successful future. And they need to focus on education. And by doing so, it is crucial that we provide that transportation for them to get to school, correct? So when I think about transportation and how they've been coming to school, it's really happened since the 20th century that we've been using these yellow buses. So 100 years later, here we are using pretty much the same type of technology. And it leaves me to wonder, why aren't we doing better? I think electric buses is the future. It is a demand of the future and of our students. We've seen that through student-led initiatives, such as those mentioned by Luisa. And I think moving forward as a sustainability officer here, it is important that we really are giving our students the world, which is the motto over here at Miami-Dade County Public Schools, and giving them that microphone and that voice. So part of what I'm doing right now is creating a student advisory council, and they will be key in the input on what we will be doing with our transportation infrastructure here as a district. Thinking about the emissions in the transportation industry and how they account for over a third in the United States, I don't think we have an option to sit back and relax, especially considering that we have 999 buses in our fleet. That type of impact and the possibility that we have as a third largest school district in America is insane, for lack of better words. We can really be leading this movement forward, and we intend to do so by taking very calculated steps. So talking about the Volkswagen settlement, we have made our first purchase of 10 buses, which we are so excited about. We will be receiving them sometime in the summer, and we're working with our transportation department to take the necessary steps to plan on receiving those. Some of that includes safety training. The actual mechanical parts are not that challenging, but we do want to ensure that we are going ahead and ensuring to safety, right? Safety is our #1 concern when it comes to our students. And that means we will be looking at training on how to not overcharge our batteries and prevent lithium ion fires. So I do think that we have lots of work ahead of us. We will also be working with our transportation director in using route efficiency metrics and seeing how we can go ahead and meet the requirements of our routes, and also see how far these can go to make sure that we are providing an adequate transportation for our students. With receiving these 10 buses that we will be getting in the summer, we are also preparing with our electric infrastructure. What that means is we've reached an agreement with our utilities to install 10 chargers in 6 sites. They will be level 2 chargers. And I think it's really important to notice that when we are preparing for electric charging infrastructure, it's crucial to be having these conversations with our utility providers. It is a benefit to them. They will obviously have a little bit of an increased electric bill, so there's a lot of rebates and opportunities that I think everybody should grab when they are preparing for this electric charging infrastructure. We're anxiously awaiting. I did hear on a news report, hopefully it's real news, that Ms. Harris will be going ahead and announcing the rebate awards for the Clean Bus program. We did additionally apply for 28 clean school buses. So hopefully we'll get some news today on if we will be receiving that award. There's lots to do in the district though. And I think 10 buses is a great start. We're going ahead and we have a lot, 11.6 million from that Volkswagen settlement. And so today with that 30% cost share, we spent about 1.2 million out of pocket. We do have plans on future purchases. Of course, with the dynamic economy, it is not definite on how many will be purchased, but we are aiming to have a total of 50 from the Volkswagen settlement. That being said, really anxious to hear about what that news is with the Harris and having our 25 clean buses possibly added to that fleet. This is just a stepping stone. And to echo back what Louisa said, we do need additional support. And I think it's amazing that we have calls like this to share best practices and continued workshops with other sustainability directors and officers across the nation to see what are some creative financing structures that can really help us move that needle forward. I appreciate taking the time to work with you guys today, and I really hope that we continue these conversations so that we can electrify our transportation industry.
Great.
Thanks.
Thank you for insights of the leadership you're taking at the local level that can be modeled across the U.S. Now we're going to time for some questions and answers. Into the conversation, just raise your hand and I or Christian will bring you into the video fold. But first, I'm going to look at, we have a few questions in the Q&A section here. And let's, how many school reap $5 billion to fix the problem? We had mentioned earlier, oh, were you trying to, Carly? I think you're on mute.
Hey, Carly, you're on mute. Can you unmute yourself? Thank you.
Yes, sorry. My internet broke up a little bit, so I didn't know if that question was directed at me.
It's for anyone here. It's a topical to what you were doing.
Okay, what was the question?
So let's see, with this $5 million to $1 billion. I think we know the answer is no. But what is needed, right, to do this effectively? What's the upfront investment?
Yeah, so I don't know how many buses there are in America, but if we want to completely electrify all of the bus fleet, just ballpark, 5 billion's probably not enough. To give you an average, we're looking at about $350,000 on some of the more affordable electric buses. So just doing the math there, and all of the school districts, you know, around United States of America, and the buses are just one part of the cost. We also need to look at, you know, the electric charging infrastructure, which we can get a lot of help with from our local utilities. But then there's training, personnel, additional staff that is necessary. So I don't have a figure to give you, but I will say that a lot more funding is necessary if we really do want to make this a reality and not just a goal.
I would also like to add information. Once you start doing the research on what programs do exist, they haven't been operating for long in this country, but Fairfax County, Virginia has a program. I think it's been 2 or 3 years in operation, and they had a partnership with their utility. I think it's Dominion Utilities, who are doing some of the upfront investment. Of course, it's in their benefit to have more electric usage than fuel usage for any utility. So I'm going to encourage that we explore that as well. Here in Florida, we've got investor-owned utilities that keep on raising the rates on us year after year, and for a pretty profit for their shareholders. They need to start giving back, quite frankly, and this would be one way to do so, to help the districts with the upfront investment. Whatever the difference between an electric bus and the old-fashioned bus, we could bear, but they should be investing in this future as well.
That's a good point. I mean, a lot of the buses have an 80% reduction in operating costs when it comes to energy, and a 60% reduction in maintenance costs. I mean, there's only 7,000 power electric bus, 3,000 in a diesel one, and the engine, I think they make on the important because of the health of our kids. It's a no-brainer. And so if we look at some of the other questions here, looking at the technology additional benefits that they provide, there's a few questions in the chat focused on this theme. So clearly for the health of our kids and future, this is unbelievably important. What are some of the other additional benefits? And I think William Reinhardt, you had put a couple answers into the chat. You could recap those here as well and add to this question.
Yeah, what I wanted to say is that one way to look at this or to discuss this is I made a comment in my earlier remarks about vehicle to grid. And if you're in the utility business, you often throw around the term utility services as a broad catch-all phrase for things like balancing supply and demand, so you don't have brownouts and voltage losses, controlling voltage on the utility lines, These are the kinds of things that utilities have to deal with at the same time that they're delivering power to you. And batteries in school buses actually can be part of the solution to all of those things. So if you think about a battery as a two-way energy storage device, it can either consume energy to move kids around, or it can put power back into the grid to address a peak load demand, to address a voltage regulation issue that the utility has. Now, there, it's going to depend on where the buses are, because you're putting it into the grid at a specific location to address a voltage problem. So it doesn't solve every problem, but these grid services, as I call them, are part of why when Cindy was talking about the utilities should get more engaged in this, they have reasons to do it, not just to sell more electricity, but to also have better manage their system. That's really what the vehicle to grid studies that NYSERDA did were all about, is like, this changes who the stakeholders are for this vehicle and for the grid itself, that there are more players involved. You need better communication. This is what the smart grid is all about. And so that's really also a rationale for why utilities should have an interest in supporting the deployment of electric school buses. One last point I want to make, it's not really about other uses, but it's I think an important point. The previous question was, how much money do we have to spend, or will 5 billion be enough, et cetera? And I don't remember who it was, but maybe it was Kaylee said, we're looking at $350,000 a bus, I think was the statement she made. Having a background in the last 8 years in the solar energy world, what I want to make everyone be mindful of is, when we talk about new technology, right now we're probably looking at the most expensive phase of that new technology. As we scale up production of electric buses, as we scale up the battery production, we're already seeing this, by the way, with batteries, and we've already seen it over the last 10 years with solar. The cost per watt of installed solar has gone way down, way down. And it's really much more economical than most people realize now, because their mind is still kind of back 10 years ago when it was really expensive. That's going to happen with school buses. I mean, with electric school buses, as we ramp up manufacturing and we go to scale with it, the cost per unit goes way down. So we can't take like the current cost and multiply that times the number of buses to calculate what it's going to cost. It's actually going to be less. So this is the good part, right? We're going to see those downward price curves coming.
That's absolutely true. I mean, battery costs reduced by 85% easily. So, and it's continuing to go down, and there's new innovations in it. So that's the exciting part. The other really neat, exciting thing is the peak demand for electricity is when the school buses are generally parked. So
Yeah.
it works really well timing wise,
Right.
where they're not used because everyone's in school at that time.
Yeah.
So there are multiple effects here. We have a question here. What are some of the biggest misconceptions about electric school buses?
I'm happy to. Oh, sorry. You go ahead, Cindy.
I was just going to suggest, when they were first discussed a couple of years ago, there was concern from the workforce at the county and at the school district that it would result in a loss of jobs, which is not the case at all. There is, as was mentioned, some retraining that needs to be done, but that is honestly the only misconception that I'm aware of, was how it might impact people who are currently in the transit industry, but I'm not aware of anything else.
I'd like to piggyback off of Ms. Lerner's response there. And I also saw in the Q&A that there was a question on operational challenges and budgetary restraints. So I'll kind of kill two birds with one stone, even though we're not killing birds because we're environmentalists. But so I think, and I'll give you the three common challenges that we've had. Transportation wise, $350,000 for one of the more economic electric buses in comparison to a regular bus that's $110,000. So that is a hard pill to swallow. And to echo back what we were saying earlier, just like renewable energy, this is new technology and it will eventually become more affordable. But right now it is a large pill to swallow when we have a school district as large as us with a lot of priorities to fill in some of those gaps when it comes to education performance, especially when we're talking about equity. So that's one of, I think, the challenges and the misconception that maybe it's not affordable, but thankful to partnerships, funding, and creative financing structures, we are coming closer to making that a reality. That's why we're pushing so much for additional funding. Another misconception that I've heard is, and I think this comes with anybody who's kind of new to electrical vehicles, even if it's a compact car, is range anxiety. It is a huge topic of discussion. Nobody wants to be stuck on a road, and that's more of a culture change that needs to be brought about with the correct education and awareness that we can charge at an adequate amount of time, and once we trial and error how far our buses go, we can apply efficient routes to that. And that's what our transportation department is actually preparing for as we wait on receiving our first rounds of buses. Another misconception I've heard is the concern, and I've heard this on some of the parent side. Safety is number one, always, for our students, and there's a concern that these electric buses may cause electric fires. And there's been some bad press and information in the news and lots of opinion articles that go against electric buses. And again, I would just say that combustion engines are combustible. And that being said, electric charging is something we need to consider, that we're charging adequately to avoid any type of hazard that can come with an electric fire. And there are many ways that our manufacturers have already planned for these in their tech specs. So that's kind of the myth that we have to debunk. The actual probability of electric fires, I don't have that statistic off the top of my head, but it is rather low. So I would say that that's kind of the operational challenge, the myth buster that we're working to shape as a culture when it comes to these electric buses.
Great. Will, did you have something?
Yeah, thanks, Alex. Hard to build on the expertise of others on the call, but I would just say one big misconception about this historic moment that we're living through is a lot of people assume, oh, the federal government's playing the largest role in infrastructure investments that it has since the Eisenhower administration. The Biden administration is putting forward $5 billion to electrify school bus fleets. That must mean that state and local governments can take a step back. And in fact, the opposite is true. Because the federal government is spending more than ever before, state and local governments also need to meet this historic moment and spend more than they have historically in order to qualify for the competitive grants and in order to take full advantage of all of the funding opportunities that are out there. So a big misconception here in Connecticut, I can't speak to nationally, is that a lot of my colleagues and constituents sometimes assume that because we're so fortunate to be living in this exciting time for infrastructure, we can take a step back, and it's exactly the inverse. We have to lean in more than ever before on this topic of electric school buses and frankly, countless others.
Yeah, that's a good point, because we can make this exponential, because I mean, there's 40,000 school buses sold each year. If we were just to continue at the rate that we're doing right now, it's 12 years to electrify the entire nation. So we've got to find innovative ways to accelerate it, because 12 years is too long for the health of our kids and the future of our climate nation. The one thing that just keep in mind that we have a question here that in the spirit of innovation, is there any way to repurpose current school buses to make them electric? Or this involve buying all new school buses? Just quickly on that, there is a company, some out there that I've seen that can retrofit and replace a diesel engine with $50,000 to $100,000. So there are other ways potentially to do that, particularly as the markets expand, of taking maybe some of the newer diesels and turn that and just retrofit them with an electric engine at a much lower cost too, as a part of the overall solution. All right, Will, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I wanted to comment again as the, I'll call it the energy wonk in the room. I wanted to comment on a comment earlier made about the concern that some, I think it was parents have about electrical fires on these electric school buses. And the point I want to make is we are always more concerned about the devil we don't know than the devil we do know. And what that means in this context is the risks of automobiles, gasoline cars, diesel cars are very great, but we're used to them. It's when you deal with a new technology and you're talking about substituting something new for something that you're sort of familiar with is where you seem to be hyper concerned about the risk. And it's same with renewable energy. You know, there's sort of themes going around about how wind energy is dangerous or solar power causes radiation. If you're an engineer, you know that that's not an issue. It's solar radiation is something different from nuclear radiation. But anyway, the point I'm trying to make is people tend to be more nervous about new technology, new innovation, something new being introduced when there's a risk that may actually be much less than the risk that they're used to. Like, how many people die driving cars every year? We've just sort of, that's been included into our assumptions about what modern society is. But you don't, if you applied the logic we apply for new technology to someone coming today and saying, I'd like to introduce something to this society, it's called an automobile. It's going to cost 50,000 lives a year. People are going to say, what? No, we can't, that's too risky. You know, we can't do that. That's kind of the problem that new technology always has, is the perceived risk of something new is always more on the minds of people than the existing risks, which they've sort of just assumed are part of our society. And I was involved with hydrogen vehicles at NYSERDA for a few years, and I saw this amazing video of comparing two cars, one with hydrogen compressed gas tank, one with a gasoline tank. You make a leak in both tanks and you light it off and see what happens. I would much rather be in a hydrogen car when there's hydrogen leaking out and it's on fire than in a gasoline car when gasoline is leaking out and puddling under you and then going into flames. It's actually a very dramatic video. So the risk is always perceived for the new thing more than for the thing that we're kind of gotten used to. And that's the point I want to make, is that's one of the issues we have to address as we deal with public education about these new technologies.
Thank you. That's a very solid point about how we tend to think as humans, not necessarily, hey, what's the reality of this new technology? And the reality is it's very safe. We carry it around every day in our hands and put it right in our phones, right?
Mm-hmm.
Great. So rounding it out here, if we can do kind of a quick around everyone, if you were to think about the benefits to your community, to your district, what is, about 30 seconds, what's the biggest benefit you see in your community, or one of them, because some of them are going to overlap, right? So who would like to jump in first? Benefits of
I'll jump in first. I think, so for me, I think it's just really, electric school buses will improve the health outcomes for our students and their ability to learn. And that's my primary focus.
Yeah. Great. Next.
I'll piggyback on that because we're on the same page here. I realize that my number one job is to drive student outcomes, and their safety, student safety, and student health is a huge driver of student academic outcomes. Providing clean transportation that is contributing to student health drives student outcomes, and that is my number one job here. So I'm thrilled to do that and to deliver a clean planet for the next generation.
And I'll piggyback off of Louisa. Sustainability, if we really want to sustain our future and sustain the performance of our students in district and districts around the United States of America, we need to ensure that they are getting to school safely, and in doing so, that they have the correct resources to ensure a successful education for their future. And the way that we can do that is by improving our air quality and reducing our carbon emissions with electric school buses. Thanks.
And I'll just go back to my initial comments about Florida being ground zero for the adverse impacts of climate change due to the transportation sector being the largest sector for climate pollution. And we're seeing sea level rise at an alarming rate. Florida, parts of the coast of Florida, if you look in 20 years, are underwater if we don't do something. We have got to take action now. I want to quote somebody, I can't even attribute who it was, at a Aspen climate meeting in Miami last year. They said that setting net zero goals is not a get out of jail free card. That in fact, it is critical that we recognize the dire situation we're in and take action now. And taking action now means we invest in our electric school bus infrastructure right away.
I'll just add one little piece here. What I like about it is obviously the health for the kids is sort of like the first order issue. But the second order issue is the kids are our future, and we need to surround them with examples of what the future needs to be. That means electric buses, not the dirty buses. It means renewable energy at your schools, so that and curriculum, so that they are learning about this future that we all have to embrace, and not think of it as, in fact, what still is in many people's minds, alternative energy. It's not alternative energy. It's the only energy that will get us through the future. So the whole kind of educational and worldview perspective that you can get by immersing the kids in this future and the future technologies that will get us to a survivable planet for us humans.
Well said, everyone. And it's inspiring to see that we can achieve that. We have the investments coming in, we have the technology already. Now it's just a matter of policy and putting it forward. So it's a people problem, not a technology problem. And that's something that's very, very solvable. And I really appreciate and applaud everyone's here's efforts to advancing the urgency and implementation within your communities. And great. With that, we're actually slightly over time. So I apologize if we did not get to your question. If you have further questions, please feel free to email them to ramona@protectingamerica.net, or just check out the press release and give us a call, and we will be happy to connect you individually with any of the speakers or answer any further questions you have. Again, thank you so much for attending, and we appreciate your time, and looking forward to seeing electric school buses every single morning and evening across America.